What if the hardest moments of your childhood turned out to be your greatest advantage? Today on Flying Upstream, we're joined by a man who went from foster homes to orphanages to the heights of Wall Street, and whose life proves that adversity can become the foundation for resilience, clarity, and purpose. Today's guest is Ed Hajim. Did I pronounce your last name
Oh,
right?
you missed it again. It's Hajim.
Hey,
Hajim
Joe.
sounds much better, but it's unfortunately Hajim, like shouting for Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hajim. All right. Today's guest is Ed Hajim, the son of a Syrian immigrant. He is a seasoned Wall Street executive with more than 50 years of investment experience. He has held senior management positions in the Capital Group, EFF Hutton, and Lehman Brothers before becoming chairman and CEO of Furman Cells. He today has created some courses and some products that help people not just be able to determine how they want to live their lives, but also walk them through what that could look like and what possibilities exist. Ed, welcome to Flying Upstream.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, I'm so glad to have you. Let's start a little bit. I always like to start at the beginning. I think the foundation of our lives, the beginning is so important to the rest of it. Could you share a little bit about your childhood, what that was like, and what it was like moving through foster homes and orphanages?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a long story. It starts with my father losing everything in 29, and he's a Syrian immigrant. He did extremely well in the 20s, became quite wealthy, lost everything, and as he said to me, in 1933 I had to decide between committing suicide and driving to California, where everybody said the streets were paved with gold. On the way out, he stopped at a distant cousin's home, and in a relatively short period of time, married one of the cousin's children. And there were 15 years difference between my father and this woman, but she also believed the streets were paved with gold. They continued on to California and found out the streets weren't paved with gold. And 3 years later, I was born on my birth certificate to an unemployed father and a homemaker mother. Dad had lots of demons from this great loss he had between 29 and 33. He also lost his mother. He also had a very strong personality. So 3 years later, after 6 years of marriage, my mother basically had it and basically asked for and got a divorce. And she basically took me from Los Angeles, where we were living, to St. Louis, where her family was. She was quite unwelcomed. Nobody was welcomed in 1939 for another 2 mouths to feed. Anyway, Dad got visiting rights on Sunday and $5 a week of alimony and child support. A couple of months later, he arrived after driving 1,800 miles on a Sunday, picked me up. Instead of taking me to the park and taking me to a movie, he got hopped back on, and you'll see the front of my book, hopped back on Highway 66, headed back to Los Angeles, called my mother from the road, and told her not to look for us, and told me subsequently that she had died, which I believed for a very long time. And if you want to find out what happened, you have to read the book. So my publicists don't tell the whole story. Anyway, Dad and I were together for a couple of years. He turned out to be a radio operator aboard a ship. So he was in and out of Los Angeles. I stayed with friends and neighbors. We had no family. And in 1941, that all ended with Pearl Harbor, where he was either volunteered or was drafted into the military. And he put me into the Catholic welfare system, which at the time was not a great place to be, but it was one of the best systems at the time. And I was then in 5 different foster homes over the next 5 years. They moved from the first one, which was really cold and abusive, to one which was the final one, unfortunately, relatively short period of time, was warm and caring. Dad came back from the service on the East Coast. I flew across country. Those days, almost a 5-stopper on a DC-10 at 10 years old. We spent that summer together in the YMCA on 34th Street. He was looking for land-based work, couldn't find it. We ended up in Coney Island in a hotel room. He finally gave up and went back to sea. And the summer of 47, he finally got his first assignment. And he decided to put me with one of the neighbors. At the last minute, in the middle of the summer, she decided she wouldn't do it. So actually, I spent, at age 11, part of that summer in that hotel room by myself. Dad arranged for food at the local delicatessen, gave me some money, told me to stay out of trouble. And then in September, the woman would take me. It turned out she didn't. And Dad, who was quite a good talker, talked my way into an orphanage in Far Rockaway, and I spent the next 3.5 years at that orphanage. It was trading in my room at the hotel in Coney Island for a room with 50 other kids. Was doesn't sound like a good deal, but for the first time in my life, I got consistency, I got community, and the local public school was superb, and I flourished. Unfortunately, at age 14, I aged out of this particular orphanage, and my father subsequently, or really at the same time, disappeared. So over the next year, being a freshman in high school, I was in the process of becoming a ward of the state, and loved because of some wonderful social worker. Instead of sending me some awful places in which you could have in those days, reform schools and all kinds of places like that, I got into another orphanage in Yonkers, New York, which was very close to an excellent high school. And I got an epiphany at that time because 80% of those kids went to something called a private college. And I decided this orphan was going to go to a private college. And that put me to work becoming a varsity athlete and a good student.
That is amazing. That is mind blowing, to be honest. The resilience that it takes as a child, and when you don't know any better, and you sort of know that perhaps that's not the best cards that you were dealt, but those were your cards, and it sounds like you just went along with the cards that you were dealt. You have mentioned in our previous chat that adversity can actually be a gift. Now, coming from someone after hearing that part of your story, how did you come to that conclusion?
Disadvantages. Think about ending up in 5 different foster homes, and by the way, 5 Catholic schools and 5 Catholic schoolyards. What happens if you have to go to 5 different Catholic schoolyards? You develop a talent that lasts the rest of your life. It's called adaptability. You immediately know how to adapt to an unusual circumstance. And I remember just in my business life when something difficult came up, I was always the guy who volunteered because I'd always been through difficult circumstances. Yes, I would say that basically early disadvantages can become advantages. And also resilience. Once you go through a couple of these bad situations, you come to resilience and perseverance. And then also you got this little person on your shoulder after a while and saying, you can do it. And I think that's those early. In fact, I find young people that don't have adversity later on in life get a great deal of anxiety because they face things they can't struggle. Also, my life, and it's not saying you're lucky, but everything was a little bit better. I always kid about college when I got rejected by every fraternity. I could have blown out and left the school, but the food was better. And instead of having a bunch of roommates, I had one. And so it was actually a better deal than I had, even though it wasn't such a good arrival. So all through my life, I've kind of slowly done better, and you appreciate it more. When you start out with a lot, it's very hard. There's nothing more to get. And I find that I grew up in a community of very wealthy people, and their children, don't understand that there's, nothing better out there. This is the top of the pile. So, but the disadvantages become advantages. Now, you do get some disadvantages. They're disadvantages. Like I was an angry young man for a long period of time because I kept asking, why me? But I was able to channel that anger into trying to do better. So I was able to do that as well. So you can take even a disadvantage, which is a disadvantage. Being angry is not a good deal, and channel that energy into, what you're doing, because it requires a certain energy to be angry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. That, there are some things that are flatly disadvantages, but it's what you do with it, how you use that defines that. At what point did you realize that the hardships that you had gone through and the disadvantages that you had were going to now serve you positively?
I guess all through my life, I kind of felt that I had this extra capability. But I tell you the truth, it really was the writing of the book and going through my life that actually brought it to me very clearly. I kind of ran through life pretty quickly and was pretty busy all the time. Wasn't worried too much about introspection as to why I was like the kind of person I was. But all through my life, I felt I had capabilities that my peers don't have. And when I give talks to people, like I just gave a talk in Texas to the foster angels, there were foster kids in Texas. I said, you basically have an advantage over your peers because you have certain capabilities they'll never be able to have because you've gone through these difficulties. And I think the same thing with I call one of my favorite quotes is early failure is a gift. Late failure is not a good deal, but early failure is a gift. You learn from that. And I had an early failure in my business life. And the same thing as a child, you basically are failing when you're in my situation, you're failing on a regular basis and you're able to live with it, almost daily. And that's fine. After a while, it becomes second nature to you and it isn't such a bad deal. But I did have some positive. My father, although he abandoned me 4 times before I was 15 years old, gave me one thing that I recommend that every child should have, and maybe it's not parents can give. It's what I call unconditional love. He wrote me all the time that I was the greatest, and that I was going to do this and I was going to do that. In fact, in my book, you'll see there's a letter when I was 10 years old, trying to explain to him that I really was not the greatest, and every once in a while I was a bad boy. So, but he was constant on that whole process. And of course, growing up in the Catholic school system, the nuns were terrific as well. So, and they made it very clear. They said, if you do the right thing, you'll end up in the right place, no matter where you start. Don't let your beginning define your end. And if you do the wrong things, you'll end up in the other place. That didn't sound so good to me. So help me make that decision.
Helps you decide pretty early.
Yeah, right.
That's amazing. So when you wrote the book, that sounds like that was the first time that you actually were able to do some I'm not gonna say that. Introspection. How did that start to shape what you sort of did from your life from that point forward?
Well, I found out that the next, and I believe what I call pivoting during lives. People pivot many times, and I think young people today who are going to live to 100, get to pivot a number of times. And at that point in time, when I started, my wife and my children and the University of Rochester also forced me. Whoops, what happened there?
I can still see and hear you.
Yeah, I basically felt that I had to make the next pivot. I really felt that when I decided to write my life, I started to learn things about myself. And when I finally got the first book finished and sent it out, people said, no, you can't just produce this for your family. This is something that can be useful for, and quite a number of people said, every freshman at every college ought to read this and recognize that anything is possible and that education is the solution. So instead of just publishing 100 books, I decided I would start on this crusade of adding a dimension to college education, which is instead of just learning algebra and chemistry and history and English, you learn something about yourself. Basically try to not only graduate with a diploma, but graduate with a life design, where you've asked questions like, who am I? And where do I want to go? How do I expect to get there?
I love that.
I started on that process and I wrote a second book, a fable, which actually established this whole process. And now I'm on this kick of getting the course into a bunch of colleges. We have 7 beta sites now. There are 4 colleges, 2 high schools, and 1 organization that are using the course. And I'm very excited about the possibility that kids will start to ask those kinds of questions. Many things you learn at college become not useful in a few years. Like I don't know if you know what a slide rule is, but I was a slide rule champion. And within 3 years, the computer came out and it was worthless. And but having a life design, having thought about where I want to go, all the 4 Ps, what are really my passions? What do I really want to do? And how does it fit into the next 40 to 50 years? So that's a pivot. You've come to the end of our conversation. I thought you were going to ask me these wonderful questions you sent me about, what was it? What story changed my life? And I had printed that out yet last night. So
yeah, let's go for it. What story changed your life?
That's many stories. When I was going to try to add many stories changed my life, but the big one was here I was an orphan, in an orphanage, but the high school had all these kids who went to college, and so I had to go to college, and I worked at night, and I worked as a pin boy in a bowling alley, and I worked as a bag boy in a grocery store, try to save a little bit of money. But I knew the only way I'd get is a scholarship. And only 3 or 4 scholarships in those days. And I missed the one I thought I would get, which was the New York State scholarship. but I applied to the NROTC scholarship. Everybody had to go into service at that time. And if you took this exam, they only gave 1,200 of these a year for the entire country. And I figured I had no chance at all, but I did it. And somehow I got it. I got it. I barely made it. In fact, I didn't make the first 1,200. My number was 1,205. But they said because I was close enough that they have some dropouts that I got the scholarship. And that really changed my life because it showed me that here was the next path. I could go to college, become an engineer, make a living, and then make a life. And that really changed my life. But then there are many stories that go on. I mean, even late in life, let me give you a story, a very great story. I was in my 60s, early 60s. I'd really been a CEO. I've been, chairman of the board of a private school. I was a managing partner of a major firm and so on and so forth. And I got to Nantucket and they said to me, my friend said, you got to join the golf club. So I was a golfer. I loved it. I said, sure. 5 years later, I didn't get in. And I finally said to the president, who was a buddy of mine, what's going on? He says, you'll never get in. So instead of leaving the island, my wife said to go build a golf course. I built a golf course. Build your own golf course. And what's so nice about that, I go when you have to play 9 holes, you go for a little refreshment. And you go up to the counter there, and you say to the girl, I want a Diet Coke. And she says, what's your number? You know what my number is? It's number 1.
Yes.
And we've taken this golf course now, and we have a thing called the Children's Charity. We're now the largest charity on the island. We have 25 scholarships a year for the high school. We've got a couple hundred kids have already gone through our program. So this is a story. It's a great story. It's luck. I mean, most people that you couldn't get in the golf course, and I was a golfer. I played twice a week usually. What they would normally do is leave. I just built a house, take the old lady and go someplace else. Instead, sat down, found 300 acres, and I built one in Vail. So I called the guy from Vail, and he came running out, and he took a look at it, and he said, yeah, we can do this. And, that's a great game changer as far as I'm concerned, because it's been a terrific amount of fun. The people in the club have been fabulously generous, as you can tell. We have a major endowment now, which takes care of our charity. We actually supply about 90 charities on the island with contributions every year. So anyway, that's just another story. But the original story was this: just looking at this paper, and the NROTC scholars are saying, boy, I could see my path for the next 7 years, where I would go to a college where I was hoped to graduate, then be a naval officer for 3 years, and I saw the beginning of the golden ring.
Yes, that's beautiful. What was the number one lesson you think you've learned so far in your life with everything that you've accomplished, and especially like where you started?
I think that and it is still the example today, and it's hard to do one, because like this, anything is possible. An education solution to everything should be in everybody's hands. But the one sort of simple sentence that helped me a lot was never be a victim. Never be a victim. Victim requires a lot of energy, hating people, hating somebody else, blaming someone else. Take that energy and use it on there are 2 words I love. One is thank you, and the other one is what's next. Focus on what's next. Take that energy, that being a victim, and focus on what's next. 'Cause what's next, by the way, is the only thing that really counts. Whatever's happened to you is gone. That's over. But people suffer with that for the longest time. And if you look at my life, I didn't suffer. I just went on to what's next. I screwed up a company early on in my life. Early failure is a gift. I went to a wedding. I met the president and CEO of E.F. Hutton. He hired me, made me a senior vice president. That was my fault. So I wasn't a victim when it was my fault. Later on at Lehman Brothers, I did a super job, but my boss and I didn't get along. So he pushed me out. And instead of worrying about fighting him, and I could have fought him because I was a chairman of some outside boards, but I went on to what's next, and I found my dream job of being the managing partner of a small investment bank. Not be a victim, because it requires a lot of energy to figure out what's next. So it's hard. But if you spend your time, bitching about, somebody did you in, it was wrong, then you hate the person or you sue them, whatever, that's all a waste of time. So the one lesson, I think, never be a victim. And no matter what it is, you just have to go on, even though the person is dead wrong and you're right.
I love that. What about a limiting belief? A lot of us operate based on a lot of societal norms and a lot of the things that people tell us we should do, how people tell us we should live our lives, who we should marry, how we should find that person. What's for you a limiting belief that you feel you had to overcome that you no longer have?
Well, my belief was, and again, maybe it was the Catholic Church. My belief was, if you do the right thing, you'll end up in that right place, and you keep doing that. I mean, there's, I'm sorry that religion hasn't become has become a little less popular in the last, couple of decades, because there's some simple principles that if you do the right thing, you're gonna generally be okay. You know, and if you do the wrong thing, what it basically is, when people start doing the wrong things, they have bad vibes, and they can't do things right. But so that's one of the beliefs that I stayed with me, and I continue to do that, and that's why I've pivoted away from business. Basically, I mean, this crusade I'm on is the most unprofitable thing you could ever think of. I lose somewhere between $10 and $15 per book. So, but this is the time in my life, to contribute back. I break life in my book. I break it into 4 parts: self, which you spend a lot of time on when you're very young, and you keep doing it because you want to stay skinny and you want to eat the right things and so forth. Then there's family, which is the only thing that's left after everything's said and done. You have to focus on that. And of course, business is where you make your mark and make your living. Then finally, community, and which is giving back. And if you don't have community in your 4 parts of life, you're really missing out, because that's where the great satisfaction is, where you can really. I mean, not on scholarship because I got one. And one young lady who was one of my scholarship students stood up. She has a optics engineering PhD now. She plays this. She's a concert pianist and a concert violinist. She weighs 100 pounds and she's 5 foot. And she stood up in front of 100 people and said, Mr. Hajim, it wasn't for Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here today. Well, that paid for everything I've ever done in my life. I mean, you don't get that unless you got here in what I call community. Then you give back in small ways. I've been very lucky to give back in large ways. Being the chairman of the board of trustees of a university, I was able to really make a contribution. And, and I had to quit my job. I closed my hedge fund and I went to Rochester and I spent 8 years as a chairman. But there wasn't a better 8 years of my life, because every day I was doing something for young people. And then with that background gave me this next step, which is this presumptuous crusade I'm on now to add a dimension to college education.
I love that. And it sounds like you're doing that beautifully. As we get ready to wrap up here, I would ask, my last question is for you. What advice do you have for people who may be struggling right now with who they are, what they want to do, how to take that first step?
Well, I hate to be commercial, but my book, The Island of the 4 Ps, is really somewhat the answer. And you can do it your own way, but find your passions. That's the first P. And it's an overused word, but it's basically something you have to do. What makes you get up in the morning? And also your context. Where are you living? I mean, living in Kiev today, your passions are going to be different than they are in New York City. But find your passions, establish your principles, the rules you want to follow, the lines you won't cross. Then find your partners. And of course, I think the most important partner is P1. I've been married now for 60 years, and without her, I wouldn't be here today. I always kid about this. I love her more than yesterday and less than tomorrow. And whenever I say that, she says, we skip a few days every once in a while. And then finally, the most important thing is take all of this and write it down. And so you look at it. Don't think about it or talk about it. Write it down. And then if you're lucky enough to get that far, try to find yourself a mentor. Try to find someone who's been there, done that. You see where you want to go. Okay? So find someone who basically has been in that direction. And all my life, I've kind of sought out a person who's kind of 10 years ahead of me, who's gone through the road that I've gone through. And you can bug them. I mean, sometimes they won't. You'll find someone who's willing to help you. But you got to go through this process. And it's not, you don't necessarily use my 4 Ps, but use a process of finding out who I am, where do I want to go, how do I expect to get there? And then one of the other questions is, you picture where you're going to get. Would you be happy when you get there? And if you say no, then you better go back and start all over again. But I think my process of the 4 Ps really works for most people. What it does is it develops a vocabulary, what I call your inner voice. There's only two constants in the world, and it isn't death and taxes. The two constants, one is your inner voice, you have that in the beginning, and change. And if you get that vocabulary for your inner voice that allows you to handle change, then you're way ahead of the ball game. But you start struggling, go back, by the way, there are also career counselors you can go to who do this process for you. My daughter in mid-career went to a fabulous career counselor. She spent a year going through these exercises, and she came up with a different field. She left Wall Street and became a person at TED Talks. And so now she's excited about bringing ideas to people and helping people talk and communicate and so forth. But it took a year to make, she worked on Wall Street. She was doing very well. And she said, I don't really want to do this anymore. So she stopped. But writing it down is very important. This is what this particular career counselor does. He gets you to write down these kinds of things. And each one of them is important. Your partners may be even the most important thing, the people you pick. I always find I make a very simple statement that I was only as good as the people I surrounded myself with.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a believer in that.
And you said to me that I have to, you can, if you want to hear more of this stuff, you can follow me on Instagram. I have about 300 posts now, and I've gotten one interview I had now has had 190,000 views. So I'm shocked that I don't even understand what that means. And we have a website now, which is excellent. It's been my publicist says, you got to tell them about the website. You got to tell them about it. And you got to tell them that, if my books are both audible and written. And the second book, the 4 Ps, the wonderful lady who did it put 6 voices on it, and you can listen to it a little over 2 hours. So it's kind of fun. It's on Amazon. And if you do like the books, and only if you like them, then give me a review and a rating on Amazon, because that my publisher says I have to tell you. This has been terrific, Louisa. Thank you so much.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on. We're going to link your Instagram. We're going to link your website. We're going to link your books, and any other of your links will be able to be found in the show notes for today's episode. Thank you. This has been very heartwarming and very fulfilling for me to be here with you and learn from you. So I appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks again. It was nice being here.
Of course. And for you, listener, viewer, Ed's story reminds us that adversity doesn't have to define us. It can refine us. From foster homes to financial leadership to now being an author, his journey is proof that clarity, resilience, and purpose are forged in the very challenges we're tempted to run from. If you're ready to explore more conversations like this, visit us at flyingupstreampodcast.com and keep asking yourself, what's next? Until next time.